Hi, my loves. Welcome back to the Way of Grace YouTube channel. I'm Nina, and I'm so excited to have your heartbeat here today as we dive into a rich and expansive conversation on healing the father and mother wound. And both the mother and father wound are essentially rooted in the core separation wound. And inside of this conversation, we'll discuss the impact of core separation of the mother and father wound, what we can do to support our healing of the mother and father wound, and then the restoration and reclamation of our daughterhood, really reclaiming yourself as a holy and cherished daughter of God and rerouting your identity back into being the beloved. So we're just going to dive right in. So as I said, both the mother and father wound are really rooted and they both stem from the core separation wound. And the core separation is essentially our fracture from knowing who God truly is and who we truly are in God's image. So essentially, this main target of the enemy has always been union, fracturing and severing us from this core relational design of knowing God as love and knowing ourselves as the beloved. And essentially, this fracture has created a tear in the fabric of our reality. And I believe truly all suffering in the world stems from this core separation, stems from us not knowing the love that we belong to and the love that we are, and then essentially acting out of separation on this earth because we don't understand our place and our part in this eternal dance of love itself. So we can see, this fracture going all the way back to the beginning of creation in the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And we can recognize the deception that the enemy, the consciousness of fear, put upon Eve in that moment in the garden, basically having her question, who God actually is and who she is in God's image. So having her question her innate beloved identity, wholeness, worthiness, and belonging. And the enemy essentially having her think, that God is withholding something special and sacred for her, and her believing that, is there something else that I should be reaching for or grasping for understanding to really be in my fullness. And essentially, this core separation really spiraled us then into a paradigm of shame, of blame, of guilt, of loss of identity, and not being rooted and tethered to the truth of love itself. And those were all things that God wanted to withhold from us. God never wanted us to experience shame, guilt, blame, any of these kind of dense frequency states and emotions. But because we've been impacted by this and we've been impacted by deception, we are now, walking on this earth, which is fallen in so many ways, but we're also in a really precious and critical time because we are truly reclaiming our identity as the beloved and really restoring humanity back to the rhythm of God's heartbeat. And we do this through a really beautiful redemptive process, quite literally a resurrection of ourselves as we come back into true union again with God and with Christ and with the essence and fullness of love. So we're in that process of reclamation. And, the good news isn't about conversion or forcing people to believe in God. Ultimately, the good news is adoption, and not legal adoption, but spiritual adoption. Because what essentially happens when we come back, into true right relationship with God, we come back into this remembrance of love. We get baptized in the Holy Spirit, which is the essence and energy of love and truth itself. And we come back to this innate worth, wholeness, and belonging, the remembrance of your most original design, which is always and has always been love itself. One of my favorite verses from Romans 8 is, For you did not receive the spirit of slavery, leading again to fear, but you received the spirit of adoption, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself bears witness to our spirit that we are God's children, and if children, then heirs, if indeed we suffer with him, so we may also be glorified with him. So really remembering that the Holy Spirit frees us from the density, the suffering that we experience in the world, because now we're immersed in this remembrance of love, and we're really re-anchored back to this eternal state of peace that exists in here in our hearts. And as we're staked to the truth and staked to love itself through God and through Christ, there is this just like expansion of love that happens in our systems, and this unshakability, this unwavering remembrance of who you actually are and who you truly belong to. And from that remembrance being rooted in your system, the enemy can no longer deceive you or try to shake you, because you know you're the fullness of love. You know you're a child of God. You know that you are an heir to the highest love itself. Like, what a reclamation. If we all truly believe that and embodied that, like, we would have a totally different world. This is how we restore the kingdom on earth, knowing the love that you are and knowing the love that you belong to. And I believe true Christianity itself, which, I always get hesitant to even say, like, that I'm a Christian, which I guess I don't even really consider myself a Christian, because there's been so much distortion around that word from the dogma and doctrine of the institutionalized, construct of church and religion. But when I'm talking about Christianity, I'm talking about like the most original like blueprint of Christianity, which was rooted and connected to love and to the fullness of love and restoring love back on this earth. But I believe, at its blueprint, Christianity is about restoring sonship and daughtership. It's about knowing our identity through God, right? And it's not about you trying harder, you reaching, you striving, you proving your worth. It's really about letting yourself be immersed in a level of love and a level of presence that baptizes you back into your beloved identity and frees the river of Zion, the promise that runs and flows from your own belly, so that you can be a vessel for God's love on this earth, right? So this isn't about doing and checking off the right boxes. This is about you just resting back into the assurance of who you actually are, and remembering that you are loved and accepted in this moment, in this breath. And all you need to do is come back into this remembrance of how loved you are, and just really letting yourself become more perfected in love as you let yourself come back to God and abide to Christ, right? And really restore your heartbeat to the rhythm of God's heartbeat. So, and one of the stories that I just love about God that really portrays the heart and the character of God himself is from Luke 15:11-32, which is the story and parable of the prodigal son, which Jesus told when he was walking on this earth. And essentially, this is a story about the relentless love of our Father, of Abba, of God himself. And in this story, there is a father, and the father has two sons. There's a younger son and an older son. And, this family belonged to an estate, an inheritance. These sons, worked their whole lives, working alongside their father, building this estate, building the generational wealth that the family has. And then the younger son had asked for his inheritance kind of like a little bit earlier on, and he asked his papa, his father, for that inheritance, and the father freely gifted him, most of that inheritance. And then the younger son left, the estate, and went out and kind of, squandered the money on food and drink and prostitutes and, all these things that we would consider as sin. And then eventually the son lost all of the money. He wound up in a pig pen, being treated and living and suffering, worse than the pigs. And he had to then swallow his pride and walk back to the estate, right? In this state of defeat, of suffering, of shame, guilt, blame, all of these things erupting in his system. And when he walked back to the estate, the father was waiting for him with open arms to welcome him back into the family, not needing an apology, not needing him to repent all of his sins. The father actually ran out to him in this story to go over and hug him and pull him tight, and to have him remember that no matter what, he belongs to this family. He is still whole. He is still worthy. He is not condemned. He does not need to be suffering and shame. He gets to be welcomed back to the fullness of love. And the older son, who is more representative of the law and legalism and doing it right and making sure you're checking off all the boxes, was upset at his father, telling the father, why would you let him back into the family? He needs to earn this. He needs to deserve it. It's unrightful for you to just bring him back after he squandered the inheritance. And the father basically just says, I love and accept my son as he is, and he is an heir to this family, and he's going to be welcomed back to our kingdom. So I just find that story such a beautiful representation of like the boundless, endless, relentless expression of God's love. And it's really just our remembrance that we are here to turn back to that love as we accept ourselves wholly as we are in this moment, and to not reject any parts of ourselves just because we think we've done wrong, or we, made this mistake, or we fell and failed, right? It's like, it doesn't matter. God is here to embrace you and welcome you back to the kingdom, but you have to feel worthy of that embrace. So this is where we restore that remembrance of who God actually is, which is love itself. And inside every one of us is a little girl who wants to feel deeply seen, deeply loved, and fully accepted. And there is a part of our feminine soul that will always desire love and appreciation from our Father. And again, some of you listening perhaps had really beautiful relationships with your earthly father, in which there was love and provision and protection and stability and emotional availability and guidance and support and all of these beautiful things. And some of you perhaps experience, a dad who wasn't present, a dad who maybe left you at some point in your life, a dad who was always working and never home, a father who was emotionally unavailable, or perhaps a father in which you felt like you had to prove your worth and you had to strive and achieve to be right in his eyes, to be good, right, in him. And to just really witness, what was my relationship like with my earthly father can really kind of open our eyes to perhaps a lot of the perceptions that we currently hold around God, because again, we often project the imperfection of man onto our image of God. So to really just kind of sink down into your body and take some time to feel into, what does the energy of Father feel like in my system when I bring that word into my field? What starts to arise and erupt sensationally in my body? Is there openness? Is there lightness? Is there expansion? Is there safety? Or is there closure? Is there contraction? Is there density? Is there tension? Is there tightness? And just witnessing where that energy is held in your body, and then asking yourself, what do I believe about Father, right? What did my own experience with my father shape in my perceptions and in my beliefs? Where did my father meet me, and where did perhaps I feel love and acceptance and appreciation, and where Do I feel like maybe I wasn't seen by my dad, or I wasn't protected by my dad, or I didn't feel loved by my dad? And just taking really honest inventory and reflection of that. No judgment, shame, guilt, any of that, or trying to fix or control what you did or didn't receive, but just witnessing, just being present with what comes alive as you sink into these questions and take this observation. Because, for those of us who do carry a father wound, and I would say the majority of us carry some essence and impact of the father wound in our system, because no mortal man is perfect. Our fathers are not perfect. And we have to remember that, again, both our fathers and mothers are also impacted by the core separation wound. They are also impacted by this original fracture, right? By this, lack of knowing who God actually is and who they are in God's image. And, our moms and dads have been conditioned into this fallen world, into the harmful and hurtful constructs that have been created and developed, through the world that we live in. They also have experienced trauma and pain and hurt and harm in their lives. And a lot of that has not been integrated and has not been processed and has not been alchemized, right? So I always say it's true. Hurt people, people who have experienced trauma and have trauma unintegrated in their system, continue to perpetuate that harm and often that hurt, unfortunately, on earth. So I'll go into, widening our perspective and lens on this, but to just look at, how the father wound shows up, because let's even just think of what the energy of what we would say is a healthy, supportive father, what that would even look like. And what does a father provide? What would the healthy essence and principles of the father provide? And when I sit with this, thinking about, okay, what is the embodiment of healthy father energy? I think about, love, protection, stability, security, guidance, direction, clarity, discipline, responsibility, containment, right? This feeling of being held, of being cherished, of being loved, of being seen, right? When you're a little girl, there's a yearning for your daddy. There's a yearning to be wrapped in his arms and to feel protected and loved, right? Because that is the protector in the head of the family. So when we don't receive that fully or in its fullest capacity, or it has been fractured from us, often then we can feel a loss of protection, provision, and safety, in our daily lives, sense of abandonment and orphan consciousness, feeling frozen, indecisive, or stuck in inaction. So again, like a woman who maybe didn't have healthy father energy in her field, who helped her with clarity and direction and making decisions, she didn't have that. Later in life, she could often feel very frozen in any decisions, or very indecisive, or very kind of wobbly in her direction, and not have clarity on what she actually wants. Unconscious intimacy and distorted relational values. So again, if we maybe had an emotionally unavailable father, we might now attract emotionally unavailable men because that's what we were used to growing up. Or we might have really codependent patterns in relationships because we're so yearning and searching for safety and stability and protection, but we don't have that anchored in ourselves. So we're seeking and kind of collapsing into it with our partners, whoever we might be with. Low self-worth and always feeling like you have to prove yourself could be another impact of the father wound. Seeking worth and validation through the world and not from within. That's a really big one. Always chasing the next shiny thing. So never feeling just kind of rooted and secure in what you have in this moment. It always feels like, okay, I need the next thing. I need the next thing. I need the next thing. Maybe always looking for something outside of you to fix something, right? Because there's that lack of inner safety in yourself and inner worth and wholeness. Challenges in accessing pleasure, play, fun, and joy, right? If we maybe had emotional instability in our household, or again, that lack of protection and provision and safety, then of course, pleasure and fun and play might not feel safe, because maybe you always had to brace yourself as a child. You always had to protect yourself as a child. So now as an adult, it's really hard for you to just naturally experience pleasure organically, because you have a ton of protective and defense mechanisms established in your system, which has been rightful up until this point, because your body is programmed for survival. Right? Your body's programmed for survival. So your body has done everything it's needed to do up until this point to survive. And now, hopefully, you're in a state and in a place of awareness in which you're bringing attention and getting to unravel some of these alarm systems, essentially, that have been set up in your system to kind of like downregulate some of these things so that you can come back into a deeper state of peace and safety and calmness and just this unshakability in your system, knowing that you're held in love. Perfectionism and constant striving, lacking feelings of safety and trust within yourself and the world around you. So again, like if you didn't have healthy father energy encouraging you, cheering you on, giving you that innate sense of your worth and your gifts and like how incredible and amazing you are, then, later now in life, you might notice yourself like holding back from your full expression, being really cautious and, maybe going into a next edge of something that you want or desire, or, you might feel hesitant to really chase after your dreams because you might have this fear of being disappointed, or this really deep fear of failure. So, right, you don't even let yourself try. You just stay kind of stuck and frozen where you are. Money wounds and constant cycles of feast or famine. So money is a high masculine principle, or has the ability to be a high masculine principle. So again, money is really tied to the father wound, because again, the father is mature masculine energy. So again, if we didn't have that safety, that stability, that kind of sustainability in that relationship, then often that instability can be reflected in our current relationship with money. Self-sourcing and hyper independence, being attracted to unavailable men, or stay in relationships that don't fill your heart or honor your needs. So kind of like, again, settling for what's good enough, or settling for what you believe you're worthy of, but kind of like knowing I actually deserve and desire more than this, but you're afraid that that's not available, or you're afraid that you'll never find that, right? So you kind of stay in what's been good enough, although it might not honor your actual needs and the greater depth of your yearnings and longings. Also sabotaging potential mature and healthy relationships, because maybe you are afraid of being abandoned or rejected or betrayed in some way. So you kind of like wall up and you carry some shields and you hold armor so that you essentially don't get hurt. So you don't really allow yourself to fall in love or be with someone who's embodying healthy masculine principles, or you might avoid intimacy altogether because, again, it's really vulnerable. It's really scary. And if you've been burned and hurt in the past, why would I risk my heart breaking again, right? So I'm just going to stay in a controlled environment where I can control everything, which actually is not possible at all. But, we can have an illusion of that. And then we close ourselves to love and to experiencing, just the depth and the presence of the beauty of another person, another being in our life. So those are some of the impacts of the father wound. And then the mother wound has a slightly different texture to it, because again, when we think about the essence of the mother more so holds this energy of unconditional love, of compassion, of nurturance, of quite literally nutrients that we receive. So when we have a fractured relationship with our mother, it can often feel like there's been a loss of nourishment and a deficiency in core nutrients, which often will feel like this inner hunger for women. The mother wound was actually more significant for me in my life than the father wound was. So this is what I've done, kind of the depth of my healing around. And for me, it did always come up as like this hunger, this like unsatiable feeling in my system. And I was then always reaching for things outside of me to try to fill and satisfy, these deeper needs for compassion, love, safety, support, nurturance, all these beautiful qualities that we should receive from the mother. If we don't receive that, it often can feel like just a hole in our system that is never filled and never satisfied. So the mother wound, can show up and be impacted in kind of sacrificing our needs for the approval and acceptance of others, self-abandonment and betrayal and denial of desires, insecure attachment, unconscious intimacy and codependency, perpetual shame and feelings of unworthiness. Some of you too might have had mothers that were competing against you, who were maybe always putting you down, who were projecting their own insecurities onto you. Like that's a really real experience for many of us. And again, our mothers too have been impacted by the core separation, and our mothers too have experienced trauma, hurt, harm, and pain that often has been unprocessed. And now, it unfortunately gets projected into their relationships with their children because they don't have, the restoration and safety and flexibility and resiliency in their own nervous systems to hold, the sensation that they feel. So unfortunately, we often can be on the other side of those projections of that hurt, of that harm, and of that unresolved pain that's in our mother's systems. Maybe too, this mother wound, you can be impacted in feeling like you always have to wait for permission, lacking healthy boundaries, neediness and anxiety, unresolved grief, fear, disappointment, and resentment. I find for women, especially, like the main fear that we hold is the fear of being disappointed. And we have to remember too, like our mothers have carried so much pain and have, held their emotions inside themselves, have suppressed and repressed so much of their essence and who they are, because unfortunately, they've lived in a world in which it wasn't safe to maybe fully express themselves, in which they did have to contort themselves to being someone else a little bit to fit in, to belong somewhere, to even belong in their marriage, like whatever that construct has been. And we carry in our lineage, this suffering of our maternal line, of, the shackles, right, that they've been carrying and kind of constricted in, and the bondage that they've felt in their own systems. And I feel our generation, especially, we are like the generational chain breakers. We are the ones who are healing the generational curses that have been carried. And we're the ones declaring we're going to emerge from the wilderness and rise into the promised land, right? We're going to recreate a new world, a new earth for our future sons and daughters. We are really the ones like going down and into ourselves to heal this generational pain and trauma and hurt and harm in our systems, so that we no longer project it, into our family systems upon our children. So this is like so big and so vast. And if you're even here listening to this, I can guarantee you've been a woman who has been called forward into this reclamation and redemption. And this path requires so much grace, so much compassion, so much tenderness, so much patience, like so much nurturance, because, we're unloading a lot, right? It's not just what you've experienced in this lifetime. It's what your lineage has been experiencing for lifetimes, and really dismantling and dissolving what isn't yours to carry anymore, and coming back to the truth of who you actually are. So again, The mother wound too can affect us in feelings of comparison, competition, and jealousy with other women, distrust of the feminine and the sister wound, self-blaming and low self-worth, shrinking self to be liked, unprocessed emotions, especially anger and rage. That's a big one that's been really, really suppressed in the system of the feminine. So just kind of sit with and witness and notice, maybe how some of these things have shown up in your life, essentially the impact of the father and mother wound, how that has kind of perpetuated itself into your life experience. And then knowing, ultimately forgiveness is the pathway for inner spaciousness. And forgiveness is for you. It's not for the other person. And it's really just the conscious and deliberate decision to release feelings of resentment towards someone or something and taking your power back from the experience, the person, or the situation, acknowledging what has happened, and then ultimately accepting what you can't change, right? So zooming out and remembering too that both our mothers and fathers also have experienced pain, hurt, harm, trauma, and they did the best they could, right? It's like only until we know better can we do better. And unfortunately, most of our parents didn't know better, and they might not ever know better in this lifetime. But is that a reason for you to not heal? Absolutely not, right? It's like, and we're not going to see the end result of our own kind of inner work and inner union that's being recultivated, but we have to still stay courageously committed to doing it anyways, because we know ultimately this is causing a ripple effect in humanity and on the earth for our future sons and daughters and for the children that are coming onto this earth, so that one day the full restoration of the kingdom is going to be here. I have full faith and full trust in that. And for me personally, I'm going to walk this path doing everything that I possibly can to be a vessel for God's love and to begin the ripple of kingdom here on earth. No matter the harm and the pain and the trauma that I've experienced in my life, I'm going to use that as essentially fuel for my wisdom, fuel for love, fuel for compassion, fuel for forgiveness, right? We always have a choice. We can direct the path to suffering and pain and staying in the story, or we can direct the path to love and truth and liberation. So forgiveness is a beautiful way to begin to, essentially decongest our system of resentment, bitterness, blame, guilt, shame, all of these things that we've carried, to open ourselves to more love. And, the first stage of forgiveness is first acknowledging and telling your story. Many of you have never even had the opportunity to validate your own story, because maybe you've just worked your whole life being the good girl. Let me hold it all in. Let me just do my best. Let me just not get in trouble. Let me do all the right things. And then one day you literally feel like you're going to blow up. That's what happened to me in my mid-20s. And you just kind of, threw up all of your trauma and all of your pain. And, it just it was like a pin just about to pop your whole system. So we have to give ourselves space to be seen and to be heard. And the only person that needs to validate your story is you. And then if you do have supportive and loving people that you can trust and that you feel safe with in your life to receive your story and to simply witness you, that's beautiful. Let your story be seen and heard by others who can hold it, or by a skilled professional who is here to support you and walk beside you and, hold you as you alchemize a lot of this energy and a lot of the things that you've been carrying. And then you have to feel the feelings. Often when we start to descend into this work of healing the God wound, the mother wound, the father wound, the separation wound, naturally tons of feelings and emotions are going to come up. And to remember that emotions are just energy in motion. There's no good or bad emotion, right? There's just dense emotions and lighter emotions, and we have to feel it all to feel it all. And so much of our feminine journey is expanding our capacity to be present with sensation, no matter what that sensation is, not escaping, not running away, not dissociating, not disconnecting, but being fully present with what's alive and true in my system. How do I feel? And what do I need? Those are two important and powerful questions to ask yourself like a million times a day. How do I feel? And what do I need? And really listening to your body, really listening to the sensations that are arising, because that's the language of your body. That's your body speaking to you. And then really becoming more attuned with your feelings and your emotions and asking your body, what do you need to feel more safe and supported? How can I support you in moving this energy through you? Which is why I'm really devoted to deep somatic work with women, because again, we can't just think our way out of a story, out of a circumstance, out of the pain. We have to descend. We have to feel it. We have to transmute it. We have to move it through our system. So to really give space to actually feel, to feel anger, to feel rage, to feel resentment, to feel bitterness, to feel sadness, to feel grief. Because eventually those emotions, once you really feel them and go in, they actually will transform and be transmuted into pleasure, into expansion, into aliveness, into vitality, into joy, into love. But we have to go down and actually feel what's been suppressed to open ourselves to the expansion of the beauty that's on the other side of that. So feel the feelings. And then open to grace, letting go of judgment and withdrawing your energy from the story itself. The pain releases when you release the story. The more you stay stuck in the story and pointing blame and getting caught up in why this has happened to me and holding anger and resentment to all who have done you wrong, then you're just going to stay in pain. You're going to stay in your pain body. Your pain is going to continue to persist as long as the story exists. So this is where, we have to kind of like draw our energy back to ourself, release judgment, and start to really just like see it for what it has been and really get deeper into the truth and start to recognize, what do I actually need now to heal? What do I need to do to support myself to let go of this pain, to create a new story? Because then you're rewriting the story, really transmuting the wound into wisdom, and really, seeing how the experience or whatever you've met has given you an opportunity again for learning, for a lesson, for reshaping your perceptions, and really bringing love where it hasn't gone before, first to yourself and then to the world around you. And then ultimately, as we accept, what we cannot change, we do find peace. And as we rest in God and Christ, there is eternal peace in our system. I always say God is like the ultimate reparenting. God is here to hold it all with you, and you can bring your feelings, your emotions, your anger, your grief, your sadness, all of it to God in your prayer, in your conversation, in your worship. When you're in that intimate presence with him, he's here, just like the prodigal son, the father, open arms, just waiting to receive you and embrace you, right? But can you trust that you're worthy of that embrace? And again, this is where we're restoring our daughterhood, not in our earthly mothers and fathers, but in God and our heavenly Father, right? In the higher power that is expanded and holding us all. What happened for me personally when I came back, to Christ and really got like fully pierced and penetrated with the light and with love itself, is my relationship with God did then transform my relationship with my parents, because I started to recognize and realize, actually, I've I've received what I've needed from my earthly parents, and there's actually nothing I need from them anymore, because all of my needs can be met in my relationship and union with God, right? My safety is found there. My peace is found there. My care is found there. My nurturance is found there. My provision is found there, right? So as we anchor safety in ourselves, we become like less shaken by what we're getting or not getting from those around us, right? Because no one's going to be able to provide, all the things that you want and need. You can only fully find that in God and being rooted here in your heart and your body. So it was just so transformative, because God did open me to see more from his perspective and from this lens of truth. And because I was immersed in the fullness of God's love, I was able to essentially flood love and compassion and forgiveness to my mother and to my father, and to again, accept what I can't change, and to also see them as hurt little children who also carry unresolved pain and trauma and hurt and all of these things in their system, right? So it just kind of changed my whole perspective on the situation, and really coming back to God can so deeply restore our innocence, our wonder, our curiosity, our playfulness, like this remembrance of who you actually are, which is first and foremost a child and a daughter of God, not of your earthly parents, but of God, of the fullness of love, of this immeasurable frequency of love that you have always belonged to. You have never been abandoned from. That love has remained stable despite what outer circumstances and experiences have shown you in your life. God's love has never left. Unfortunately, we experience, the disharmony of other things out in the world, but God's love is eternal. God's love is stable. God's love is the rock that you get to stand upon. You just have to trust that your feet get to be rerouted back in that foundation of love itself. So a lot of inner child work is really supportive for some of this healing. There is an inner child healing meditation here on YouTube that you can receive that will be really supportive. And I most likely will create some kind of separation wound healing practice at some point in this space. And again, we go much deeper into these topics inside of the Way of Grace membership, and we do deeper body-based practice, somatic practice in that space to really integrate and support this process of healing, of integration, of forgiveness, of cultivating more spaciousness in our systems to receive the fullness of love. So I really just invite you to ask your body, how do you feel? What do you need? And can you offer yourself, maybe the love that you didn't feel from your parents? Can you lean into God and feel that love more fully from him and from within your own heart? So I'm so here to support you as you move through this on deeper levels. You can always comment, send me a message. You can join the membership if you feel called to have more support and to walk beside a collective of women who are really devoted to being these generational chain breakers and to bringing love where it hasn't gone before. You can join us using the link below. And I will see you next time in another episode.